I don't know if did we do it at least once in March? I know we skipped the second time because I was at SOAR, and then a bunch of people told me you wouldn't be able to make it last time, so I decided to cancel. Yeah, you didn't miss it. Because you were gone, and Donna was going to be gone, and you said you were going to be gone, so the only one I thought that might be here is you. And so I said, we might as well just not cancel it, or we might as well just cancel it. So we're going to back up a little bit and just cover some things. We did cover this quite extensively already, but it doesn't hurt to go over it really quick. When we were talking about some of the archaeological evidence for the Solomon's temple, or the temple that Solomon constructed or started constructing once he became king of the United Kingdom. This includes Israel and Judah. And while there is this is probably an artist rendition of what it looks like. It's not very big. Like I said, the whole thing could probably fit in this room. And of course, it doesn't exist today, but but the question is, did it ever exist? Well, Solomon's temple, the Zerubbabel's temple, we can probably say with quite certainty it does exist, because Zerubbabel's temple, which was rebuilt after they returned from Babylonian exile and then remodeled by Herod the Great, we know that probably existed due to we can still see the Temple Mount. And that Temple Mount archaeologically follows what we know to still be of the time period. And then, of course, we know that this temple was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. But the question is, did Solomon's temple ever exist? And that is harder to prove. We have no structural remains found. So normally when they look for this kind of thing, they kind of go digging in the area where they think it might be, and they look for foundation stones or something, or maybe religious artifacts. And we haven't found any kind of structural remains of the temple. But the biggest problem with that is where we think it's at, we really can't dig. And that's because of the dome of the rock that currently sits on it. While the Jews control much of the Temple Mount, the actual upper structure is, I believe, controlled by the Muslims. And they pretty much forbid any kind of archaeological digging in this area. You can dig underneath it, but I don't know how, but you have to be careful on how much you dig underneath it, because you don't want the structure on top collapsing on top of you. And of course, I think there's only so far up underneath it you can dig. So I don't actually know the actual rules, but I'm sure if you wanted to find that out, you could go and look them up. And of course, then you have the issue of how do you know you're finding the original temple and not the replacement temple? Or maybe the replacement temple's foundation was used to build the foundation of the original one. So it's almost impossible to obtain due to the political climate in the area at this time. There are people who believe that the temple existed but doubt that Solomon built it, and even if Solomon did build it, they believed it was kind of modest, not the size and the scope as described, and so that's kind of the issue. I don't necessarily know if that's a thing. I mean, we certainly found other structures that would have been bigger than the temple, so I don't know why people think that temple would not have been big. We've even found evidence of other temples to other gods that are bigger, dating back to that time period, so it's not even like that was something they couldn't do. Maybe they just didn't trust the Israelites to do this, or they largely viewed, a lot of people viewed David as not necessarily as a king, but a warlord. And so maybe they didn't think it was in his capacity as a ruler to do something like that. We do know that if the Bible describes it as a very extensive project that involves thousands of people working in teams, and they weren't just building the temple, but they were also building the palace. And then they were importing trees for Lebanon, and they were getting stones from like precious jewels and gold from Africa. So, I mean, there should be maybe other evidence of this out there. I don't know if they found anything to support it. Here's some of the other similar temples that are comparable in size, and you can see that we have found those foundations dating back to the time period. These are not Israeli temples, just in the general region. I think the Temple of Balat is in Turkey, or at least modern day Turkey. That might have been Assyria at the time. So at least you can see examples of these things existing in history. Yes, ma'am.
You know, go back to that previous. So when they see things like the one on the far left, and sometimes they'll declare that some type of fort or something that somebody built. So how do they differentiate whether it was a temple or whether it was somebody's protected?
Well, I mean, you're always arguing over something like that. And normally it has to do with what you find around it.
Okay.
Like maybe they found some documentation or writing or pottery or some religious artifacts that might support that.
Because I've been to things like that, and they would say, this is a monk area. And so they'll have the monk cave here, the monk cave there. And so sometimes, and then I've been to others that then castles or,
Mhm.
they built for.
Yeah. So there was a story I heard in grad or undergrad when we were talking about archaeology. We were talking about like one of the chariot cities, and he was relaying the story of this professor and his grad student on a dig, and the professor said that this wasn't a place for storing horses, and the grad student said, "Yes, it is. These are teeth marks." And he goes, "How do you possibly know that?" And he goes, "Because I grew up around horses and I see this all the time." So, I mean, you might find, I mean, people are going to say one thing or the other, and you're mostly looking for consensus in archaeology. You will always, I don't know if I've pointed this out already, but when it comes to anything, and anything historical, anything at all, it doesn't matter what it is, but especially the Bible, it seems like, you will always find someone that will put something out there that just seems radical. And it will get its 15 minutes of fame, and then it will try to circulate, and most people will dismiss it. And that has more to do with the way scholarship is designed than it actually has to do with legitimacy of the claim. Scholarship largely wants something new. And so if you can't offer something new, then a lot of people offer something, well, it's not necessarily they make it up. They just take a fringe idea and they run with it. I mean, if you were caught making something up, that would be very bad for you, and your claim to scholarship would not survive much longer than that. But you could latch on to the fringe. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to take you seriously, but it doesn't make you a liar either. But I can say this like, the most scholars except Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the authors of the four Gospels. But there almost always you will see someone say, and this is debatable. And mostly when they're talking about that, that means that there's a small minority of people that debate who wrote this particular book. And some of that is like, well, was it Mark that wrote Mark's Gospel, or was it Peter that wrote Mark's Gospel? Because many people accept that Mark might have been the writer, but Peter was probably the dictator. And it was very, very common for people like Paul to have someone write on their behalf. So, I mean, there's something like that. That's not really fringe. That's just arguing over that's not semantics. arguing over a technicality. But I mean, you'll also find fringe stuff out there. Like I think it's Paul's letter to Ephesians. Some people think that it wasn't written originally to Ephesus, it was written to Laodicea. And that, I think, that's not a terrible idea, though I think the Ephesians one tends to make more sense. The question is those places are really, really close. And a lot of times these letters were copied and shared with the local churches. And so who got it first? Was it Ephesus or was it Laodicea? But I can't really think of something that's, this is the thing that I think is the most fringe, that I actually know of, is that Jesus, the Roman persecution was propaganda. Roman persecution of Christians was propaganda. Well, it's an argument. It's largely an argument from silence, is because there are some examples of Roman persecution, but I mean, when you look at the actual archaeological evidence, you find very little of it, and that's what they're arguing, is that it wasn't as widespread, or if it did happen, it was mostly either A, they deserved it, or it wasn't as widespread as they were claiming. And you can see, it's probably common for people to exaggerate claims, especially claims that might make them look good. So that's probably where the idea gets credence. But when you talk about when they all came together, I think it was at Nicaea, it said there was thousands of people in there, and most of them were suffering from some bodily ailment due to persecution. And by then, this happened like 320-ish. The persecution was almost dead by then. So if you're talking most of them had some kind of bodily ailment, then that would say that that would suggest it'd be a lot more widespread than it is. But even then, you have to accept that the person who wrote that most of them had some kind of bodily ailment, was being truthful in his claim. But that's an example of what I think is fringe scholarship. I mean, I don't think most people take that seriously. There's fringe. Oh, another example of fringe scholarship is that Jesus wasn't a real person, and even religious scholars that are atheists who reject the divinity of Christ will largely argue that he was a real person. It happened too organically for Jesus not to be a real person. And so the people who take that opposite position, that he just wasn't real, that's on the fringe. All right, so there's always something. We do have, as we talked about last time, the temple shifting project, where things have been found of this time period, where a lot of this dirt was being moved for construction with bulldozers. So the University Bar Island, I'm not sure how to say that, founded the temple shifting project to go through all this dirt that the Muslims were digging out of the area. And they found a lot of small type artifact type things, including a number of coins, jewelry, beads, tools, pottery. Pottery is always the most common thing. And what was found to be a seal impression. They believe this seal impression belonged to Ayahu Emir, or son of Emir, who is specifically mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 20, verse 1, as the priest, the son of Emir, who was chief officer in the house of the Lord, head of proselytizing these things. So this would make him a priest in the temple during the time of Jeremiah, which means it happened before the temple was destroyed in 586 BC, probably around 600 BC. Now, this doesn't necessarily prove that Solomon built the temple, but it did mean that the temple was in place by the time period if this artifact if this artifact holds up as an authentic artifact. And for the most part, because if it was found naturally, it dates to the time period people believe it is. And that's what I talked about there. They found a few other things, such as a seal or a weight and an arrowhead. We talked about do you remember us talking about the bone boxes? That was the brother of Jesus, James, the brother of Jesus, ossuary, which they now believe is real. And then the ivory pomegranate, which believed to be the top of a scepter used by a priest in the first temple, dated to be around the time that the temple actually was built. So this would put it almost directly in Solomon's time frame. But as with a lot of things, if you don't find it organically, there's always, is it real? Is it a fake? It was originally found in a shop, then declared a fake, and then it was meant to be declared authentic again. And I don't know, they'll probably go back and forth to this for at least quite a while. Yes, Ed.
I just did reading and such on the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Ah.
There's some controversy on that because of the original viewing and patching of the parchment. And now that we've got more modern methods of looking at some of this sheepskin to actually see what the parchment was made out of, they said they found some that's made out of sheep and part of it made out of cattle.
Mm-hmm.
Which means it's completely, initially they thought it was all of one particular sect of Jewish believers did this particular stuff, but now they believe it was a broader range of individuals in the book that they weren't interested in with Jeremiah. And they said they've been trying to patch it together, and part of it didn't fit because they were trying to put two different writers back together, but they didn't tell a difference between the parchments. And so now they've got better ways of scanning it and patching it back together. So I didn't know if that was something that you've heard of. Or,
I don't know. I mean, I haven't. How recently have you heard this?
well, I've seen it within the last 10 days, but it's several years old.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. I haven't heard anything like that. The last I heard, the last I did any extensive study on the Dead Sea Scrolls is when I actually visited the Qumran area in Israel in 2012. So that was 13 years ago, and at the time, they seemed to believe, or at least as far as my memory is concerned, is that they were all done by the Qumran community, or which kind of, yeah, a single community, or unless they are branching out as the Essenes as a whole. And I'll talk more about that here because I'm going to cover the Dead Sea Scrolls, at least in part today, if I get that far, and I'm hoping I will. The last thing we talked about before we closed up, because I ran out of slides, I didn't run out of slides, I just forgot to put the new ones on there, was the Jehoshua inscription. This was I think it's a metal fragment of bronze, I don't remember, or maybe copper, that's written in an ancient Phoenician script. This Phoenician is, I think, from the Greek area. And it refers to his work on the temple, as mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 12, verses 1 through 16. We'll look at that here in a second. But largely, at this current juncture, it's believed to be a forgery. And however, it's never been proven to be a forgery. And right now, that's where it stands. This is what it says. This is, I am Jehoshua, son of Hezekiah, king of Jehu, I think or Judah, and I performed the works of this house when men's generosity was full in the land and the wilderness, and all the cities of Judah could give money as a sacred donations abundantly to buy stones, Jupiter, wood, Edomite, copper, or performing the works in the good faith, and I made the repair of the temple and encircling, weighed the walls, and the stone structures and the lattices and the spiral stairs and the recesses and the doors, and this day will become a testimony that the work will prosper. May Yahweh ordain his people with this blessing. All right, so that was a quick recap of everything that we covered in probably the last 2-3 sessions.
So they think it's a fake because they look at the age of what it was written on and see if that is.
Yeah, so they'll do carbon dating on it, but carbon dating is an exact science. I can't tell you, I don't remember why this particular one is thought to be a fake, but there are a lot of, like with this one, a lot of it comes down to the break. They believe that the ivory itself is authentic because it matches with the carbon dating, but they don't necessarily believe that the words themselves are authentic, that they were later inscribed. That's the same thing with the bone box. My guess is that that's probably similar to this, is the copper or whatever material it's written on, I think it's copper, is authentic to the time period, but the actual wording is not. That was later inscribed at another date. That's a lot harder to prove, and so with like this particular one, you're looking at the break and to see if the break falls naturally in the wording. I think because you're only seeing the front side, the break is on the back side. And if those letters move into the break or stay clean with the break. I don't know why this particular one is in forgery, but that's normally the kind of things that they're looking for. They're testing the date of the materials. They're testing they're looking at the writing style. Is this a writing style that fits in with the time period? Is there anything that might indicate that the writing is written at a later date? So they're looking at different things. It's never just one thing. It's normally where was it found? How was it found? Who produced it? Yeah, and sometimes you get lucky. If you have a guy that you know who spends, a lot of it relies on your credibility too. There's a video I watched 2 weeks ago that has nothing to do with archaeology. I was just curious about it. And in video games, there is a category, there's a way to play a video game called speed running. And the idea is to see how fast you can beat the video game. All right? And the video I was watching was about a man who set a record for the Mario speed run, the first Mario that came out, and by beating it in 5 minutes and like 54 seconds or something like that, which is nearly impossible to do. It's not impossible, it's nearly impossible to do. But the thing is, this is the very first time that he had ever ran a video of this effect. Normally, the people who do speed runnings run thousands of videos, and you might see a personal best, but very, very rarely do you ever see one of them set a record, even after thousands of attempts. Now, a lot of people are very suspect that this particular person was authentic because he not only did it in his first attempt, but the likelihood of that happening is almost impossible. So a lot of it is you're relying on your reputation, where you found it, what it looks like, what's the dating say. And so if any one of those are working against you, you're gonna have people pushing back. All right, so let's move forward. Let's talk about the divided kingdom. What is the divided kingdom? Does anybody know? When we talk about the divided kingdom, what are we specifically talking about? That's a very simple way to put it. The tribes of Israel dividing largely from the north and the south. It's fair. Most people say it's 11 against 1. I think it's probably more accurate to say 10-2. And so this happens because of events that are a few different events that are chronologically listed in the Bible. The first of those events has to do with the actual draft of the labor force. This starts in 1 Kings chapter 5. King Solomon drafted forced labor out of all of Israel, and the draft numbered 30,000 men, and he sent them to Lebanon, 1,000 a month in shifts. They would be a month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. Abdoram was in charge of the draft. Solomon also had 70,000 burden bearers and 80,000 stone cutters in the hills, besides Solomon's 3,300 chief officers who were over the work, who had charge of the people who carried out the work. So, what we see here is Solomon has forced labor of the people to not only build his temple, but also build his palace. Fun fact, which group did not have to do this? One of the 12 tribes did not have to do this. No, it was the people of Judah. Yep. And then we have this issue, which comes into play quite obviously. Now, King Solomon loved marrying foreign women, especially the daughter of the Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonite, Hittite, women from the nations concerning which the Lord said to the people of Israel, "You shall not enter into marriage with them. Neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods." Solomon clung to these in love. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and did not wholly follow the Lord as David his father had done. And Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Moloch, the abomination of the Amorites, in the mountains east of Jerusalem. So we have two separate things going on here. Solomon, even though he built the temple, he helped establish the kingdom. He grew the kingdom to its full potential, and it never grew bigger than that. He is considered evil for two things: multiplying marriages that would pull his heart away, and engaging in idolatry, especially Moloch, who I think is probably, in my opinion, the worst of all the ancient gods. Not because any gods have power, but because this is often where child sacrifice was done.
And doesn't it teach that they were almost like gifts to his wives? You know, it wasn't like he thought of, okay, I want to build this, but it was almost like, I don't know, he started with marrying the women he should not have, and then he gave them gifts because this was their God.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's probably the implication. I don't think it says that anywhere specifically. I mean, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But these are only two things, and maybe there might have been hope, but the Bible does mention a third event, and this has to do with Solomon's son, Rehoboam. So Jeroboam and Rehoboam, which I hate. I hate Kings chapter 12, because you have two separate people with two very different ideologies and political alignments, and they have very similar names. And trying to keep them together is difficult, especially when I originally thought that Jeroboam was Solomon's son. And so my inclination is always to say Jeroboam is the son. So Jeroboam and the people came to Rehoboam, and Rehoboam is the king of Israel at this time. He is the son of Solomon, and it's the third day as king. So this is after Solomon said, "Come to me again the third day." And the king answered the people harshly and forsake count. Oh, so sorry, I left a part out. So that Jeroboam came to him and asked to have the burden of his father lessened. And so Rehoboam says, "Come back to me in 3 days." He's going to consult his advisors. So the first thing he does is he consults his father's advisors, and they say, yes, give them what they want, lessen their burden. Basically, we finished what we set out to accomplish. There's no reason to keep doing this. Make things easier for the people, and the people will love you. Give them their bread and circus. And then he's like, okay, well, let me see what my friends have to say. And they use some very colorful language here, with the, which is something about a euphemism for his penis. Um, and he decides to listen to his friends with the response, "My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions." The problem with that is Judah had it pretty light by comparison to the other people, and the other people probably thought, well, I think it's time for us to go our own way. And so the northern kingdom is split off from the southern kingdom, or what is later called the kingdom of Judah, that eventually gets, I think it's Simeon that's inside of Judah, and it just kind of gets swallowed up all into Judah versus the northern kingdom. Or you might see it as the house of David or the house of Judah versus the northern kingdom. So it's not even like the 10 tribes anymore, it's just the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom lasted approximately from 931 BC to 722 BC. What happened in 722 BC? Does anybody know? Yes, why did the kingdom only last that long? By who? Nope, not the Persians. Persians come much later historically. By the Assyrians. No. Persians and the Medes, the Assyrians came from the north. The Persians and the Medes, I think, came from the east. So they lasted for a little bit more than 200 years. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the kings that are mentioned in this. Of course, the first of these kings, or the founder and the establisher of the northern kingdom, was Jeroboam the first, not to be confused with Jeroboam the second, who I believe comes later. Yeah, he's right there. And not only did he help to lead the majority of the Israelites in a rebellion against the kingdom of Judah, he did two things to make sure that they wouldn't be attempted. Well, he did one major thing. Well, two. We'll say two. Major thing to make sure that they would not return there, and that was move the capital away from Jerusalem to, drawing a blank on it. I can't remember. I want to say Bethel, but that doesn't sound right. What was the capital of the northern kingdom? That is going to drive me crazy. Where's my phone? It's in my office. I can't even look it up. You're looking it up, Ed? Oh, Samaria. Well, no, it gets moved to Samaria much later. It was, I don't know if he moved. Maybe he just did the first thing. Yeah, it is Samaria, because I see it right there. It's on my slide. Omri built the capital in Samaria. We're going to talk about Omri in a little bit. He lasted as king for about 20 years, 22 years, and he also moved worship of God to Bethel and Dan, and he did this by building 2 golden calves there for the people to worship. He was eventually succeeded by Nabed, who came to the throne and lasted for the better part of a year before he was assassinated. This is going to be a running theme of how people get to power. Now, if you'll go back probably to, if you go back a little bit, you're going to find out that to the time of David, you're going to kind of that David kills 2 individuals for doing something. One of them for claiming to kill Saul. Historically, we learn that Saul killed himself. The other one for killing Saul's grandson. And with the implication that he's telling David this, that David will reward him, and instead David kills him. And do you know why he says that? Why he kills them? Yes, but why does I mean, they thought they were going to gain favor with David by killing David's enemies. So why in turn does David kill them? You don't kill the Lord's anointed one. And the idea is the king in succession is the Lord's anointing one. So apparently we can see that they quickly get away from this of where we have assassinated. Bathsheba moves on to assassinate, after assassinating Nahab, takes the throne, is there for about 22 years, where his son Elah becomes the successor. Elon, after being on the throne for about a year, gets assassinated, except he gets it assassinated while he is drunk, according to the biblical text. And this is a second lesson if you shouldn't drink so much alcohol to the point where you cannot protect yourself from your enemies. He is succeeded by Zimri, who is the shortest king in the Bible, only lasted for a week, where the text said he committed suicide. Zimri is succeeded by Omri, and this is going to begin what is called the Omri dynasty. It is probably the most well-known part of the northern kingdom, lasting, I believe, about 100 years. We'll talk more about that in a second. It was Omri who built Samaria as the capital and established the northern kingdom, the greatest power that they ever had. Under Omri, they reached their height and they never got that great again. Omri was succeeded by his son Ahab. This one might sound familiar to you because it is Ahab that married Jezebel and specifically opposed Elijah. And we know what kind of happened to them. They were killed by or they were succeeded by Azarah, who was injured in a fall and died, to be succeeded by Jerome, who was king for about 11 years and eventually killed in Jehud's revolt. In fact, this particular revolt is one of the things that is, I think, mentioned by God is, I know what you're going to do. I know you're going to be a terrible king, but I'm going to allow you to do it anyway. And this, he destroys Ahab's dynasty, or Omri's dynasty, and officially I think this puts an end to the Omri dynasty, and he tries to make peace with the king of Assyria and probably succeeds by he and his ancestors paying tribute for a while, but he is eventually defeated succeeded by Joash, who is defeated by Judah and Amram, to be replaced by Jerome, who is the longest living king of the northern dynasty. He lived for almost 40 years. Is that what the math says? A little bit, 45 years is what the math looks like, and lived during the time of the prophets Amos and Hosea. He is succeeded by Zechariah, who assassinated, ending Jehu's dynasty. He is succeeded by Shalom, who lasted for about a month before he was assassinated. I'm telling you, there's you're going to see a theme with these assassinations. He is succeeded by Minha, who pays tribute to Assyria, also probably prolonging Assyrian coming down and just taking the land for themselves. He is succeeded by Pekah, who was assassinated by Pekah, not to be confused with Pekah-Iha. I love these biblical names, don't you? And my favorite part about being a Bible scholar. Pekah allied with Ahab against Judah. He was eventually succeeded by Hoshea, who was the last king of the Israeli dynasty before he was, or the northern kingdom before he was carried away in Assyrian exile and eventually died in Assyria. All right.
Now, when I looked up Samaria, it said that
Oh, Shiloh was the one I was looking for. Shechem, that was the other one. Yeah. Shechem and Shiloh were the two I was thinking of. And I just was drawing a blank on it. I knew Samaria didn't sound right. I mean, I'm reading it here on my notes. And I'm like, there is something else. That's just whatever. Thank you. I appreciate it. Now, we mentioned that Jeroboam built worship centers in Bethel and Dan. So, is there any evidence that this happened? Specifically in the issue of Dan, because, well, we have two different things that happened in Dan. We have the city of Dan, which is way, way, way up north, and we have the territory of Dan, which, if you look at your Bible, I believe the territory of Dan is in the south. But in the city of Dan, we have found this rather interesting shrine. You can see it here. It's quite extensive as far as structures go. In fact, I don't know if you can go inside it. I went to Dan, but I never got to go see this particular structure for some reason. I don't know, maybe it was closed off or something. But it is, as far as things go, very conclusive proof that at least that there was worship happening in Dan during this time period. And this shrine is proof of that. So the king says, so the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold, and he said to the people, "You have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." And he set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Then this thing became a sin for the people, went as far as Dan to be before one. You see I think this is other locations at Dan for places of worship. They believed it happened through a 3-phase construction, not happening all at once. This was probably modified. Oh, this wasn't the shrine. My mistake. This is like a gate, I think. That's my mistake. This is like a gate. And this is what they thought the shrine was, this right here. They was luckily modified from pagan worship at the time. Eventually you can see through, it's kind of maybe hard to see in that small picture, but this is also a reconstruction of the altar that they had, but would have been accessed by 2 sets of stairs. It was later rebuilt in the Hellenistic period. The Hellenistic period is around 400 BC. You start to see less Phoenicians and more Greeks in that time period. Hellenistic culture was very, very prominent. It lasted for centuries. Even after Rome took over the Greek world, it was still dominating culture over Roman culture. So it was later rebuilt, but I don't know how much use it was. Here's some more pictures, if you can see, of reconstruction and preservation. Dan, I like Dan. When you look at Israel and you go to Israel and you visit a lot of these sites, you mostly spend your time in the desert type areas and these dry, hot places. But Dan is very lush as opposed to most of Israel. Shrine at Bethel, that's a little bit harder. I mean, this is what they believe Bethel is. I think this picture was taken in the 1970s. It was eventually excavated by W.F. Albright, who is a very famous archaeologist. I believe he lived around the 1950s, or did most of his work around the 1950s, maybe 1930s. And what they found that this area was very prominent in the Iron Age. This would have been around the time of Solomon and maybe later. Once you start to get into, I think, more of the Hezekiah, you're approaching Iron Age 2. You see fortified walls and domestic structures. Certainly, they found pottery that's consistent with northern Israel culture. But they haven't found anything that would say, well, this was a place of worship. They certainly found nothing like a golden calf. Not that you would have expected anything like that to survive any kind of large exile. In fact, that's the kind of thing I always wonder, like, did they set a guard? I mean, what was to stop someone from just going and stealing it and melting it down for the gold? But they did find some cult-related objects that would say that this is consistent with a religious center, so people think that that's what happened here. But we don't have any large, conclusive proof of that. Any questions on that? Great. Makes my job easy. We're going to fly through these slides today. The Omri dynasty, or what is called the Omride, I think that's how you say that, Omride dynasty. I don't know why it's spelled that way. That is not a typo. That is the way I saw it multiple times, is the longest lasting dynasty of the northern kingdom. It started by General Ori, who used military to seize control of the kingdom around 585 BC, probably one of the reasons that the king at the time committed suicide, and he was able to ride to power. We see that it is the establishment of Samaria as the capital, a city that lasts long throughout Israel's history, even to the time of Jesus. It was a very well-known region. Not the same type of region, sure, and that largely had to do with when they were carried out into exile. A lot of I don't know if I think it was that case. A lot of those old cultures, they would take their own people, or they would take other people groups and move them into newly conquered lands. And they did this so people couldn't rise up against them because they were divided as a people group. And so that's why the Israelites were seen, the Israelites living in this area were seen as half-breeds, is because they weren't true, pure Israelites. But this was before that time. So it started by General Omri, who used the military to seize control. He establishes the capital of Samaria and becomes the most influential dynasty of the northern kingdom. At the time, it had the largest army of any other dynasty, and an army that could even rival that of the southern kingdom. And it was believed that they often butted heads and engaged in small skirmishes with one another. We see no large-spread proof of one gaining other territory over the other. Maybe there was political alliances that we don't know of. But certainly, we can get a sense that this was something that happened. Kings in the dynasty: Omri, Ahab, Uzziah, Jerah, and Attila. And do we have proof that this exists? Or is this one of those things that, well, the Bible says so, but we don't have any concrete proof? Well, we do have actually concrete proof, because we have what is called the Mesha slate. I think, is that how this is pronounced? Stele? Steel? I don't know. Constructed in Mesha, ruler of Moab, in 1840 BC. As you can see right there, that's a very, as far as archaeological artifacts go, that's very well preserved. It tells of Israel's oppression of Moab, and then later boast of its victories. And of course, it specifically outlines the King Omri of Israel in its actual text. But that's not the only proof. We also have the Blask obelisk of Shalmaneser. I love it. I'm going to start getting you guys to read these names so I don't have to. Which is made of black limestone. That doesn't really look black in the picture. Yeah, that is preserved pretty well. It was found in Iraq, and they believe it was erected in 1845 BC. And this is the earliest mention of a biblical historical figure that we have, probably talking about Jehu as the son of Omri. And I think this is a part of that obelisk there that specifically outlines that line. We also have the Nimrod slab, which is, that's not the slab itself. That looks like that's cuneiform, which is the writing of the people of that area of Babylon. Babylonians used cuneiform. And so I don't know why I posted that. It was a long time ago. Maybe that's just a tablet, or not a tablet. Huh? Oh, I just know that Babylonians used cuneiform. Yeah. The top half of the summary, inscription of the reign, Adad Ninrari. Who was this? It was found in Iraq, and it specifically mentions the land of the house of Omri, referring to the northern kingdom. So we have a lot of archaeological evidence supporting this. Around 732 BC, the king of Assyria invades Israel and took many captive. In his annalistic records, he boasts Israel lit Omri land, bit Herma, all of its and their possessions I led to Assyria. So I don't know if by then this dynasty is over, but it was probably so well known and associated with the Omri dynasty that it was irrelevant that it was actually part of that land, and that this is what he did. He went to war against them. The war probably lasted about 10 years, where he finally conquers all of Israel in that time period, sets his sights on the land of Judah, is able to take over some of the land of Judah. In fact, he is very successful at taking over the land of Lachish, or the city of Lachish, which was one of Israel's most fortified cities, but he was not successful at taking over Jerusalem. Yeah. Over a decade later, Sargon II describes how he defeated Israel and took its citizens into captivity. I conquered and sacked the towns of Shinhutah and Samaria and all of Israel. As we have already said, Samaria was the capital of Israel. Now I don't have more there. Where's that stuff? Okay, well, I must have forgot to put the new slides up there. All right, so we're going to stop here for now. We only have like 9 more minutes left, but do you guys have any questions or comments so far? Very interesting. You had a very long, this is a very truncated history lesson. Keep in mind that we covered 200-ish years of just the northern kingdom of Israel. Now, is there more archaeological evidence of this time period? Probably. It's a little bit easier to say that the Bible dedicates I think it's 2 paragraphs to King Omri. I mean, the Bible considers Omri to be a footnote as far as history is concerned. But as far as archaeology is concerned, we have a ton of proof. It's undeniable that there was a king in Israel named Omri who had well-established footprint in the land period at this time. And so some people will take that and they will say, well, Omri is really the first king of Israel that we see. And Hezekiah is the first real king of Judah that we see. And I default to the Bible. I'm not a fan of absence is proof, an argument from silence. Yes.
So the time period when God really
I mean, he had Babylon destroy Jerusalem, but not, yeah. Yeah. I'm not really sure what you, what do you mean by the Jewish people now?
Well, we have the Jews, and then we have Hezbollah, and they're still fighting.
Oh, like, it has,
Is that all interact with what happened way back then? What we're talking about now, obviously now,
um,
we're talking about now, the Jewish nation now.
in very, very short, very, very short.
So that's when God scattered them?
No. There are two historical events prior to Jesus where we see the Israelites get scattered. Yeah, one of those is in 722 to 721 BC, the one we're specifically referring to here by the Assyrian exile. The second one comes much later in 586 BC, 587 BC, when Babylon comes and captures Israel and brings them back to Babylon. All right? Now, does everybody leave? No, some of the people probably stayed. You wouldn't have taken every single person, but you would have probably taken every single person of note and power. Yeah, and skill. Yeah, and skill. And then you would have sent your own people there to mix and breed with them. Eventually, we see with the Cyprus decree that the Israelites get to come back to Israel, and they do that, and they stay together as their own people, which probably meant that in that time period that they were in captivity, they probably largely stayed with their own people. And that's not really surprising, because, I mean, tribalism, you stay with what you know, especially in a strange place. When we were in China, all the foreigners were in one place together, and often we would just have time where it was just us together. The
Military concept too.
yeah.
When you go overseas, you can say that's the closest Americans are together
Mm-hmm.
because it's like.
Mm-hmm. There's another event that happens much, much later, and this is in 70 AD. In 66 AD, the Jews led a revolt against the Romans. The revolt lasted for 4 years. Eventually, the Romans win. They destroy Jerusalem. They destroy the temple. They scatter the Jews. They do not ever let the Jews come back home. Historically, I'm sure there might be more to it. And they rename one of the things that they do is they rename the region Palestine as kind of an insult to their great enemy, the Philistines. In 1947, that kind of changes as a way to, I guess, pay reparations to the Jewish people because of the hostilities that happened by the Germans. They allowed them in 1947 to go back to Jerusalem, which at the time was, I think, under British control. Yeah. I mean, that's a very simple version. It's a lot more complicated than that. And there was no nation of Palestine at that time. There were established people groups, and that was part of the problem, as you had Muslims living in the regions that were not kicked out. In fact, they were invited to, I believe in 1947, form like a two-party state-ish that never succeeded. Eventually, they would go to war many times, and that's kind of where they're at now. And like I said, that is a very truncated version of events that is a lot more complicated than I offered in the 5 minutes I was explaining it. But I mean, you could say that those were all major factors that led to it. Yeah. All right. Anything else? All right. We're not going to meet next week because next week is not next week, but the next time on the 2nd because that's Mother's Day. I assume, well, I don't know. Are you doing anything? You can come hang out with us if you want. I'll get you a Mother's Day kit. But I was thinking about the direction